All right, welcome back to The Real Story. We are racing toward a fall reopening of the schools, and districts are busy letting their students, parents, and their teachers know about the plan. Joining me now to talk about their plan is the superintendent of the Hartford Public Schools, Dr. Leslie Torres-Rodriguez. Leslie, thanks so much for joining us. Always great to talk to you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Good to be here.
So you literally just got off of a virtual town hall with some Hartford families to discuss the upcoming school year. What were your takeaways from that conversation?
Oh, big takeaways were details, details, and details. Our families want to know how the intricate details of all of the options that we're now putting in front of them.
Based on public health data is what we're going on here, and you guys really need to be flexible. You had to submit 3 different plans to the state, whether you're going to be doing distance learning, in-person learning, and if you have to shift between the two and have sort of this hybrid model. So how are you going to manage that?
Yeah, so that is the big challenge in front of us. We actually have a operational decision meter based on the COVID, right? The COVID cases, and whether or not there's any fluctuation in that, it will determine any adjustments that we have to do in the learning environment. And so it's really important for us to get to hear from families what they're thinking in terms of the options that we're putting in front of them, so that we can do the best that we can to plan and allocate staff as necessary.
As a district, I mean, are you guys encouraging families to take distance learning option instead of in-person instruction? And do you have sort of a sense of how many families would want to do distance learning?
So at the moment, the last survey that we administered was in June, and of course this was 2 weeks before the state guidance was released, and 77% of our families did say that they're going to send their children to school as long as we were implementing safety protocols. And since then, we know that the guidance has been released, and families are still wanting to know the details. So right now, we don't know how many are opting for which one. We did get a lot of questions in both the English and the Spanish forum as it related to the hybrid option and the fully remote virtual academy, which is a centralized academy that we're having. So lots of interest around the virtual remote options.
Leslie, as you know, it is estimated that districts can expect to spend an additional $490 per student on pandemic-related supplies. I know Hartford Public Schools have gotten this one-year waiver, but they're still operating with a $12.2 million deficit. So where is this extra money going to come from to pay for these supplies and also the staff that you're going to need to implement this reopening plan? That
is the complexity of it. So if you, just by the number you referenced, right, almost $450 per student, that is about $9 million for the almost 19,000 students that we have. And the additional funding that we got was about $10 million. And already last spring through the summer, we've incurred about 2 million of those. And so it will be a challenge because we are trying to approach the all 3 options, all 3 models from a cost neutral budget perspective. I've not been told that there's additional funding at the moment. And so this is why we're trying to reconfigure, if you will, the model so that we can identify staffing. And the other piece is, just like we want to hear from our families, we also want to hear from our staff as to their thinking and whether or not, what their interest is with regard to in-person and virtual.
you guys have a lot of schools, and each one is set up a little bit logistically different, with different layouts and floor plans. I mean, in general, do you have the space to be able to adhere to the social distancing, and are you looking into using any municipal spaces?
So at this point, we are not looking to use municipal spaces, and that is one thing that I did clarify in one of our town halls, and that was the definition of physical social distancing, right? And so we know that the guidance is to maintain social distancing to the extent possible. Are we going to aim to have the 6 feet, which is what we've all, heard about the amount of distancing, although it's not quantified in the guidance that's been given by the state. We are going to try to the best extent possible, get to the 6 feet. But we know, based on our enrollment and our space, we are not going to get to 6 feet in all of our classrooms. And so this is why it's removing excess furniture, reconfiguring, and then, of course, all the other requirements and recommendations around cohorting and the additional disinfecting protocols.
And as you alluded to, when you can't do the 6 feet, you got to wear that mask, although that's going to be required the whole time in school. So let's talk about masks and that requirement. Do you have confidence that students, especially the young ones, are going to be able to adopt to being a culture of masks? And what do these mask breaks look like?
Yeah, so this is where we have to think about what's developmentally appropriate. I will tell you that we have seen from early on during our meal distribution, we know that our younger students, do come and they're wearing their masks to pick up their meals. And we also know that an extended period of time might be a challenge. And so we're going to have mask breaks throughout the day where, students will either go outside, go for in cohorts, go for walks, and we also have to bear in mind that we have students that are going to be uncomfortable, whether they're young or because they have exceptionalities we do have students whose, for example, the nervous system receives and responds to sensory stimuli differently. And so there is going to be a need for us to respond to individual student needs as well.
Right. Yeah, I think we can all agree there's no perfect solution when it comes to this. One of the situations that's going to be very complex is going to be busing. Talk to me a little bit about your plan for busing. Are you going to hire bus monitors? Are you going to stagger any arrival times? And will you be putting students 3 to a seat?
So the guidance there is, again, to the best ability possible for physical distancing. And so we are going to provide transportation to the students that are eligible for transportation. And at this point, we are going to require the masks on the bus. And also, we are not planning at the moment to have monitors on our buses. That, again, from a resource perspective is just not possible for us. And so it's going to mean that we have to take additional measures, inclusive of disinfecting every time after a trip. We have buses, for example, that run 2, sometimes 3 routes in the morning and in the afternoon. And so that, of course, gets into the day, the length of a day for a student, for example. So making sure that students enter and sit all the way, to the back, and then the students in the front of the bus exit from the front of the bus. And so it's really routines and procedures that we're being so mindful about.
Leslie, we just have about a minute left. I'm just curious, has the pandemic and all the challenges that have come with it, has that led to a wave of some of the older teachers deciding that they're going to retire? And if so, how are you going to fill all those positions?
Yeah, so we just today, this morning, we released our staff survey. And so we want to hear from teachers. And though that is not the explicit question that we did ask in the survey, we know, at least I know from having individual conversations with some teachers, that that's a wonder that they have as to whether or not they're going to consider something like that. It is not something that we have begun to solve for. Is it a concern that I have? Sure, it is a concern that I have of not having adequate staffing. Knowing that there are already, before COVID, we had areas, shortage areas, if you will, not just Hartford, but across the city and even the nation. And so that's a worry that requires that we get very smart about as to how to problem solve for that.
Dr. Leslie Torres-Rodriguez, the superintendent of the Hartford Public Schools. We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
And thank you for joining us on this edition of The Real Story. We'll be back again next Sunday, and be sure to tune in to the Fox 61 News starting at 10 o'clock tonight. Have a great day.